So what happens if a person waits longer than it takes to walk 4 amot, or not 4 amot, to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi?
Then you should say the blessing again.
So that's the question. Does he go back? I mean, is silence just as bad as talking? Or is it not allowed, but it's different? That's the question that we're really asking here. Umikol makom, in any case, b'di'avad, after the fact, im hefsik b'shia b'machal v'entchat aseret hamitzvah, if he happened to have interrupted with silence. It's a funny thing to say, interrupt with silence. Meaning he interrupted by not speaking for a certain amount of time. He said the bracha, but he waited until he put on the mitzvah, but he didn't do anything. Even if it was longer than Shalom Alecha Rabbi, eino chozer u'mvarech. He does not go back and make the blessing again.
And the same is true as if you talk.
The same is true. No, if you talk, what did we say? That you have to go back and say the blessing, unless you spoke about something connected to the talit. Interesting. Why is the logic this way? Why are we seemingly more lenient about silence than we are about interrupting with speaking? Let's go down into the Rashi script for a minute.
Changes it.
Chav bet. You see the bottom right column? There's a Chav bet, bold letters. Ayen b'shibolei haleket. Rabbi David Yosef refers you to the shibolei haleket. Disvirale, that he is of the opinion, dafilu shiha b'shtika yoter michdei dibur chashiva hefsek. On the top column, on the left, even waiting longer than that amount of time silently is considered a hefsek, an interruption. V'sheken hu b'Yerushalmi. He proves that the Talmud Yerushalmi says the same thing. V'hu ba b'Beit Yosef, and the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo quotes this opinion of the Shibolei Haleket. Aval bat Rabbi David Abudraham. Who do we say Rabbi David Abudraham was? We mentioned him once before.
Big rabbi.
Yeah.
She's financing.
Very good. That was the Barbanel.
Special name, like the Bach or something.
No.
We had him in the 5 or 6 reasons for why you wash your hands. He gave one of the reasons. Rabbi David Abudraham. But yes, actually no, you could be right, the one that he was also involved in finances. Abu Derham, his name has to do with money. Abu, the father of dirham, of coins. So, must be he had something to do with money. Unless it was a mean joke. Katav, she'en shtika nechshevet hefsek. That silence is not considered a hefsek, an interruption. Vafilu shia meruba. Even if you wait a very long time. Kol shelo yisiach dato, so long as you have not thought of something else. V'huva b'Beit Yosef, and this opinion is also mentioned by Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo mentions 2 opinions. Let me pause here for a second. I do remember now that we're learning this. We told you Divrei Torah, remind you of other things. There was a rabbi who suggested that the reason why Ashkenazim are lenient about waiting silently at the table is for the reason that the table is set for Shabbat. And the bread is there in front of you. And so long as everyone is quiet, probably the only thing they're thinking about is bread. And so they could wait for a very long time, and according to this opinion, their mind hasn't switched topics. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it could be we found another source for that custom, that specifically on Shabbat, it's okay to wait a certain amount of time, so long as the table is set for Shabbat, and in front of you it looks like Shabbat, and you're thinking about bread, and the bread is there on the table. There could be an interesting reason for this custom as well. I once had a chavruta. Still, I'm in touch with him. His name was... Who am I thinking of? Akiva Bookman. He's a rabbi. Rabbi Akiva Bookman. And Akiva once taught me something very interesting. He said, if you don't know how to argue the other side as convincingly as you argue your own side, you haven't truly understood. And then later, this position was reinforced by Rabbi Telner, and then Rabbi Peretz says this is a big thing, to prove that
you gotta know both sides.
Knowing is not just enough. To be able to convincingly make their argument, then you haven't really understood what they believe. You're going to see this now. I've unfortunately, it seems like we have been consumed by some political. This one's running, and that one's running, and who's running, and they're all running to Be'er Shachar, to pits of destruction. But if you really cannot make the argument for the other side of the coin, you don't truly understand your own position. You really don't get the debate. And it takes a certain mind to be able to step into someone else's shoes. And there's a saying that before you judge someone, you should walk a mile in their shoes. Somebody once said that before you judge someone, you should walk a mile in their shoes. That way you're a mile away and you have their shoes. That was but the idea.
You want their shoes.
The idea is if you're not able to step into their mind and make their argument, you don't really get it. So here you find something in Maran, or
Judge next to me.
the Bet Yosef, he's quoting both opinions. Right now, we have a custom that in my house, obviously we don't do. We do speak after we wash our hands. But you hear another custom, it's easy to just, I don't get it. But it would be nice if we were able to explain the other custom and still had our own opinion. It doesn't take away from your stance to know why the other side holds what it holds. So here Maran leaves us two opinions. One rabbi says, waiting for a few seconds is considered a hefsek. So you cannot wait at all between making the blessing and putting on your talit. That's the shibole haleket. Then you have Rabbi David, Budraham, very good. He holds that even if you wait for a long time,
Doesn't make a difference.
it's not a hefsek. You as long as you're thinking about the mitzvah. Both of them are quoted by Maran. So what do you do? Who do you follow? Maran quotes both opinions.
Well, we had that rule yesterday.
Very good. Very good. Maran quotes two things.
Talking about
The first
bread
one.
is understandable, but if we're talking about talit, why should you stay and wait, silent or not silent? You say bracha. What could have happened?
I have two people. Let's say he's some Kabbalist. He makes a blessing and now he's meditating on his stripes of the talit and the Kehillat that's coming out of the corner. Okay. I'm not talking about him. Because him I don't understand, so I don't know what to tell you. I'm talking about the guy, and I used to see this all the time in Jerusalem. The guy makes a bracha on his talit. Maybe it's before he made the bracha, but he's standing there like this, like, Yeshua, and he's holding his talit, and suddenly some commotion breaks out in the synagogue. Some guy's collecting money, the other one wants to throw him out the door, So he waits, he's watching. He can't talk because he's ready to, but he's watching. He wants to see what happens. This guy is in big trouble because he's thinking about something else. But it could be that there's a situation like that where, I don't know, so he's watching the other rabbi put on his talit. He wants to see how he does it before he, whatever it is that you see going on. I have this problem when I go wash hands, like at weddings, wash my hands for bread. Always those guests that come, they don't remember, do you start with the right hand, do you start with the left hand, do you make the blessing, do you not make a blessing, three times, so they always wait to see what somebody else does. They see, and then they see what I do, and they get very confused. I make the blessing first. I'm only washing once. So I leave them. They're still holding the washing cup. Now they're not sure what to do. They're left over there frozen. But it could be that in such a situation where the guy's he's thinking about, maybe I'm watching somebody else or I'm following someone else's example. Somebody once put out a Purim play. So that whenever you have, like in Israel especially, always have this group of, there's a bar mitzvah, so there's few non-observant family members show up. So they come and sit next to the bar mitzvah boy and everyone else, and they just sit there with the books, and they turn the page when he turns the page, and they look up when he looks up, they sit down when he sits down, they stand up when he stands up, and the guy sneezes, everyone sneezes with him. It's, sometimes maybe that's why he's waiting for so long. I don't know what to tell you, but you're right, it's a strange thing to wait longer than you should. It could be we're talking here about just a few seconds. Doron, to answer your question, we had it already yesterday when you have two opinions in the Bet Yosef, so you know which one you follow. This rule applies to the Shulchan Aruch, not to Rabbi Yosef Karo's other writings, because there it's just a conversation. And even if it would apply to those writings, these are mentioned in two different places, meaning he talks about Hefsek in two different places. In one place he quotes the Shibbolei Aleket, in the other place he quotes Rabbi David Budraham.
When you go by order of the Bet Yosef, then what he brings down first is probably what he was thinking.
Well, he doesn't make that rule obvious. So here you have an interesting equation. He mentions two opinions, and he doesn't disqualify either of them.
Maybe one's limited to a certain situation.
Very good. So steps in the Magen Avraham. We mentioned him yesterday. Who was he? Magen Avraham.
Then they come to Usher as a coming.
Yeah, very good. He said what yesterday? About ladies and Shabbat candles. You remember?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Don't have to repeat it again. V'katav Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says, "Shelechatchila lo yafsik." That ideally you should follow the strict opinion and not make an interruption. Uvdi'avad eino chozer u'varech. And after the fact, if you interrupted by silence, then you should not go back and make a blessing again. V'chen pasukam achronim sham, and many other achronim have the same opinion. This is interesting. It's kind of the middle ground. He's saying Maran quotes two opinions, and he does not disprove them because he says you should follow one of them ideally, and one of them after the fact. You're aware? You follow the one who says that you cannot talk. Ideally, you should never, and that you cannot interrupt even with silence. That one you follow ideally. But if you interrupted, you would not go back and make a blessing, like the second opinion. And he says that even if you disagree with his analysis of the Bet Yosef, you have a simple rule: v'safek brachot la'akel. That when you're in doubt as to when you make a blessing,
You do.
you don't. You don't make the blessing. So some rabbis would say here you make a blessing. Some rabbis say you don't make a blessing. Maran doesn't clearly tell us what to do. You don't make a blessing. That's a normative. That's a normative halakha rule. But there is an opinion though that says lahakel means to say the blessing.
Yeah,
meaning you're lenient about saying God's name in vain.
Yeah.
But that's not how we pass on the halakha.
So how much does the environment you're in make a difference in what you follow? Like, if you're in with a group of people who follow one opinion, and you follow, like you do, a different opinion, do you ever change your way of doing it just to make it more comfortable?
Sometimes. There's two aspects involved here. It's a good question. You go somewhere and everyone stands up for something or sits down for something, or some people they say this
like
words out loud.
There's all kinds of customs.
Right, very good. There's a few different sources to mention here. The first one is the laws of derech eretz, the proper character traits, and that's found in the Gemara. There's a tractate called Masechet Derech Eretz. Nobody studies it. Nobody in the world. Very short. It's a few pages, like Perkei Avot.
Wow.
It's something. It's a very
Is it like with Masechet
what?
Sofrim?
Yeah, very good.
I want to study it.
It's very special, and it's easy because it's in Hebrew. It's not in Aramaic, so it's a Mishnah. So it's very. I was once thinking of it's very accessible. I mean, if basic Hebrew, and you can understand it. I was once thinking of writing it in English. We'll see. Maybe one day we'll get there. B'ezrat Hashem. I wonder if Art Scroll translated it when they did the Talmud. I don't think so. They didn't do the Masechet Kamel? Okay, so there you have it. In the end of Masechet Horayot, in most Shasas, you have a bunch of small tractates that no one's heard of. Masechet Sofrim, Masechet Derech Eretz, Masechet Kala Rabti, and Masechet, all kinds of random small Mishnahs that we don't have the Talmud on them. In there's a teaching. We went over. No, let me finish off with this thought. In there's a teaching that Leolam, a person should always Aliyah Omed Ben Yoshvim. You should not stand among those who are sitting. Val Yeshev Ben Haomdim, and you should not sit between those who are standing. And then you shouldn't be silent when there are noise. You should be noise when they're silent. And then it says Klalosh Davar. The basic rule is Ali Shanei Adam Miminhag Makom. A person should not change from what is accepted in the place where he is. But there are obviously boundaries to this. What happens when I go to a place where nobody keeps Shabbat? Here we're talking specifically on Derech Eretz, meaning things that are trivial, they're not halachic matters. You stand up for the Chadudi, or you sit down for the Chadudi, it doesn't make a difference. The Chadudi is not, do you say the Shacharit or not? That's nobody's asking you what your custom is. That everyone wants to do such a thing. There's another problem here. And the problem is the halacha in the Torah, it says, Lo tidgodedu. Lo tidgodedu literally means Hashem commands us that you're not allowed to rip out your hairs or cut your flesh when you're mourning. Right? Our rabbis have a different understanding of lo tidgodedu. They say it's a play on words. Lo tasu agudot agudot. Jews are not allowed to separate themselves into separate groups. Imagine that. And it says the reason is shelo yomru, people should not say shte torot yesh lahem l'Yisrael. The Jewish people have two different Torahs. When I was a child in the shul here in University City, there was some people prayed in one direction, and other people prayed in a different direction.
Oh my God, that was
You can imagine a guest comes to town, he's not Jewish, he comes into the synagogue and he says, "You guys crazy? You have two different gods you're praying to? One lives in that direction and one is in that direction?"
That was the worst machloket.
The synagogue wasn't facing exactly the right. So it was facing one direction, and the rabbi held you should face that direction, and other people held, no, we're smarter than the rabbi, and they face a different direction. In general, it doesn't make a difference if the rabbi is right or wrong. When people will think they're smarter than the rabbi of the community will eventually have problems. You have to have a leader of a ship. In any ship that you go, you might be smarter than the captain, but at the end of the day, he's the one who has the job to make the boat go straight. So, Lotit go to do applies many details, but in one sentence, Sfaradim and Ashkenazim argue about the details of this halakha. Imagine that. Ashkenazim say that if you're in a place, let's say Chol HaMoed, and you're in a Sephardic minyan, and they don't wear tefillin, so you're not allowed to wear tefillin, even though it's the Ashkenazi custom to wear tefillin in Chol HaMoed. The other way around, if you don't wear tefillin in Chol HaMoed, I remember when I was in Baltimore, they would put you behind a mechitza. So there was the ladies section, so that way you couldn't. I know, but I once stayed for a holiday. That way you couldn't. Why? Because you cannot do, like they tell you. You ever been in a minyan and your siddur says Vayatzmach pur kanei v'karev v'shechen? You want to say, no, you can't. Here we pray with this siddur. Never happened to you? We do this all the time. Chacham Ovadia stepped up and he said, "You guys are wrong. It used to be that when a Sephardic person visited Europe, or a European Ashkenazi Jew visited a Sephardic country, it really looked bad when you showed up and you did things different. You were saying Revach v'Atzala, and you're doing. Oh no. But today, we all know that there are different groups of Jews. We met each other already. And so the separation was already made. So long as it's within the confines of Derech Eretz, meaning you're not offending somebody, you're hurting somebody, you're allowed to sit down when you put on tefillin, and you're allowed to sit down in Kaddish, and you're allowed to stand up for something else if that's your custom. It doesn't make a difference, because the separation already exists. And this is the opinion that Chacham Ovadia follows. Doesn't seem like Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu agreed with him, and the Ashkenazim definitely did not agree with him. But that would be the most peaceful attitude, is do whatever your custom is. If you're in someone's house, and he asks you, let's all stand up for Kiddush, probably that's what you should do, regardless of what the custom is. Everyone should have a beautiful evening.